When an empath finally goes silent, it's already over. There's a moment in every empath's life that nobody else catches. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, nobody announces it. It's just quiet. And by the time an empath goes quiet, the ending has already happened. Let's look at why that is. Silence is almost never where an empath's withdrawal starts. It's the final stop of a long emotional road that most people never witness. Before the quiet arrives, there was effort. Before the distance sets in, there was devotion. Empaths don't jump into relationships carelessly. They pour themselves in completely. Their minds are built for tuning into others. They pick up on tiny facial shifts, small changes in tone, and the emotional climate of a room. This heightened awareness isn't for show. It's simply how their brain works. Mirror neurons activate fast. Emotional signals get processed nonstop. They sense what's said out loud and what's left unspoken. Because they notice so much, empaths often end up doing too much in relationships. They predict what someone needs before it's ever asked for. They say sorry for friction they didn't cause. They shift their own behavior just to keep the peace. Their emotional intelligence lets them read what's beneath the surface, but without solid boundaries, that same gift turns into self-sacrifice. Slowly, they start carrying emotional burdens that were never theirs to carry. In the beginning, they speak up. They explain how something made them feel. They try to smooth out misunderstandings. They offer context. They hope that if they say things clearly enough, the other person will meet them at that same level. When that doesn't happen, they try once more, gentler this time, then with more force, then with visible pain showing through. Emotional burnout doesn't come from one fight. It builds slowly through being ignored, brushed off, or made to feel small again and again. The empath's nervous system stays on high alert, always watching for connection, always hoping for repair. When that repair never comes, stress hormones climb. Exhaustion creeps in. What used to feel like love starts to feel like being drained. There comes a psychological breaking point where the empath sees clearly that the emotional give and take has become one-sided. They keep offering compassion to someone who won't or can't give it back. Realizing this hurts because it shatters their hope, their belief in change, in real conversation, in healing together. Walking away feels like giving up, so they stay far longer than most people would. But the body remembers everything. Ongoing emotional pressure causes an internal shutdown. The empath stops bringing up hard topics. They stop correcting things that were misunderstood. They stop voicing their pain because voicing it no longer feels safe or worth it. This isn't them not caring, it's them protecting themselves. Silence becomes their boundary once words stop working. Rather than react, they watch. Rather than explain, they save their energy. The warmth that used to come so easily now becomes careful and rationed. Their laugh gets quieter. Their replies get shorter. The emotional effort they once gave so naturally starts to disappear. From the outside, it might look like they're being moody or distant, but really, it's a nervous system choosing calm over chaos. The empath isn't trying to be understood anymore. They're just trying to hold themselves together. By the time the silence sets in, exhaustion has already reshaped the whole relationship. Inside, the empath has already moved from hoping to accepting. They're no longer trying to repair something that feels permanently unbalanced. They've learned that giving empathy without getting any back turns into abandoning themselves. And once that truth settles, their quiet isn't confusion anymore, it's clarity. By the time an empath falls silent, something deep has already taken place inside them. They've mourned the relationship long before anyone else noticed it was slipping away. Unlike sudden exits driven by anger, an empath's pulling away comes only after deep emotional processing. They don't wake up one day and just decide to stop caring. They slowly accept what isn't working anymore. Empaths reflect endlessly. After every conversation, they replay it in their head. After every conflict, they think through not just what was said, but what was really meant. They ask themselves hard questions. Did I overreact? Did I ask for too much? Could I have said it better? This inner questioning isn't a sign of insecurity. It's their way of staying fair. They genuinely want to see both sides clearly. At first, this kind of reflection makes the bond stronger. It builds accountability and helps things grow. But once the same patterns keep repeating, once apologies stop changing anything, once promises fade out, once emotional presence stays unreliable, reflection turns into recognition, and that recognition is where grief starts. Grief isn't only tied to death, it also comes from expectations that never get met. It comes from slowly realizing that the relationship you hoped for might never actually exist. Empaths feel this on a deep level because they bond not just with who someone is, but with who they believe that person is capable of becoming. Letting go of potential can sting more than letting go of what's real. So they start grieving in private. They grieve the talks that never took place. They grieve the effort that was never returned. They grieve the closeness that always felt lopsided. This grieving happens while they're still around. They might still show up, still smile, still respond, but on the inside, they're already loosening their grip. Their nervous system starts preparing for the possibility of separation. Their expectations drop lower. Their emotional investment turns cautious. What's powerful about grieving privately is that it creates closure before anyone actually leaves. By the time an empath physically pulls away, they've already shed the tears. They've already worked through the disappointment. They've already pictured a life without that connection. That's why their silence can seem sudden to others, but it was never sudden at all. It was a gradual coming to terms with reality. And once acceptance takes hold, everything changes. Once an empath accepts that their emotional needs won't be met the way they deserve, no amount of persuading will change that. Promises start to feel too late. Big gestures feel reactive because deep down, the goodbye has already been said internally. When an empath goes quiet, you're not seeing confusion. You're seeing something already finished. They've stopped fighting for the relationship in their own mind. They're letting it go there first. And once the mind releases it, the heart eventually follows. When an empath goes quiet, it usually means the emotional door has shut. Not with anger, not with a scene, but with a calm sense of finality that's easy to overlook. Empaths are naturally people who communicate. When they care about someone, they reach out. When something feels wrong, they try to fix it. When they're hurt, they try to put that pain into words. Their voice is how they stay connected to others. So when that voice goes quiet, something important has changed. People with strong emotional awareness understand that connection survives through responsiveness. It's not about being perfect that keeps a relationship alive. It's about repair. A missed moment can be forgiven. A misunderstanding can be cleared up. But constant emotional neglect, quiet dismissiveness, ongoing defensiveness, and a lack of ownership wear away at safety. And safety is what makes vulnerability possible in the first place. Empaths don't go quiet because they've run out of things to say. They go quiet because talking no longer feels like it does any good. There comes a point when they realize their words are simply being tolerated, not really taken in, heard, but not truly understood. A real conversation needs two people willing to settle and connect together. When one side keeps refusing to reflect or avoids going emotionally deep, the empath starts to feel isolated even while talking. Feeling alone during conversation hurts more than actual silence does. At this stage, their emotional energy naturally shifts. They start holding back instead of putting more in. Instead of starting hard conversations, they just watch the patterns play out. Instead of addressing every small hurt, they let the distance grow on its own. This isn't manipulation in any way, it's simply recalibration. The emotional door doesn't slam shut all at once. It closes slowly and quietly. First, they stop over-explaining themselves. Then they stop correcting misunderstandings. After that, they stop trying to be truly known by someone who has shown little ability to understand them. When an empath chooses not to share something that once would have meant a lot to them, that's not them not caring. That's closure forming right in front of you. The brain, after repeated relational stress, naturally shifts toward protecting itself. Emotional effort becomes something they choose carefully. Their attention becomes guarded. The empath starts asking themselves whether this feels safe, whether it's mutual, and whether it's still worth what it costs them. And if the answer keeps coming back, no, pulling away happens naturally. To the other person, it might seem like the empath suddenly turned cold, but in truth, the empath simply stopped holding that door open by themselves. And here's the important truth to hold on to. Once that emotional door closes for an empath, opening it again takes far more than just a simple apology. It takes consistent safety, real proven change, and trust that has been fully rebuilt. Because by the time silence shows up, the bridge they once tended so carefully has already been taken apart piece by piece. They're no longer trying to reach you. They're going back to themselves. And that return almost never gets undone. To an outsider, it can seem sudden. One day, the empath is engaged, warm, and emotionally present. The next day, they seem calm, distant, and almost unbothered. People often wonder, what happened? But what looks like an overnight change is actually the last stage of a long internal shift. Empaths pull away in clear stages. At first, they give the benefit of the doubt. They assume it's stress, a misunderstanding, or just temporary emotional immaturity. They stretch their patience further. They deepen their understanding, and they try to manage not just their own emotions, but the other person's too. This first stage is overcompensation. When that doesn't bring things back into balance, they move into the second stage, which is pulling back their reactions. They stop reacting to small letdowns, not because they don't notice them, but because they're quietly weighing whether staying engaged is worth it anymore. They start asking themselves whether every single issue deserves their emotional energy. The third stage is quiet, but it runs deep. They stop opening up as freely as they used to. Their stories get shorter and their vulnerability becomes more selective. They no longer share their deepest fears or dreams the way they once did. This isn't punishment. It's pure discernment. Then comes emotional neutrality. People often misread this stage. Neutrality can look like maturity, calm, even peace, but underneath it can actually signal deep detachment. The empath is no longer riding the exhausting ups and downs of the relationship. They're watching now instead of participating. They're gathering information instead of holding on to false hope. This kind of detachment is fully intentional, not manipulative, just adaptive. The human brain is naturally built to guard against repeated pain. When attempts at connection keep failing, the mind lowers its emotional investment to avoid further hurt. By the time silence sets in, the empath has already practiced living without depending on the relationship emotionally. They've imagined their own independence. They've mentally rehearsed the separation. They've strengthened the parts of themselves that used to lean so heavily on that connection. So when they finally step back, it feels grounded. There's no big blow up, no dramatic ending, just a quiet shift in energy that signals real finality. What's most surprising is that this detachment usually comes with clarity, not bitterness. The empath isn't looking for revenge. They're looking for balance that actually works for them. They're choosing to be where their empathy is truly returned instead of drained away. And once self-respect outweighs attachment, tolerating emotional imbalance just stops happening. That's why it feels so sudden to everyone else. What you're seeing was never actually the start of the ending. One of the quietest yet most powerful shifts before an empath pulls away is this. They stop looking for validation from the very person they once hoped would understand them best. Empaths naturally search for shared meaning in everything. When conflict comes up, they're not just trying to win the argument. They want real emotional resolution. They want to feel genuinely seen. They want their inner world acknowledged by the person they're with. In healthy relationships, this kind of validation builds attachment and deepens trust as time goes on. But when validation keeps getting withheld, brushed off, or redirected, something significant shifts inside them. At first, the empath tries even harder to explain. They choose their words more carefully. They soften their tone even more than before. They wait for just the right moment to bring it up. They hope that better communication will finally open the door to empathy from the other side. When that effort still isn't met, they often start doubting themselves instead. They wonder if they're being too sensitive or asking too much from the relationship. This kind of self-questioning shows high self-awareness, but without anything coming back, it can slowly wear down their confidence. Eventually, a clear realization settles in. The problem was never how clearly they explained things. It's about capacity. Not everyone has the emotional capacity to validate someone else's deep feelings. This realization matters because once an empath understands their emotional needs won't be met in this particular space, they simply stop asking. They stop waiting for reassurance. They stop searching for acknowledgement. They stop trying to prove their feelings make sense. This isn't shutting down emotionally. It's emotional independence taking root from within. From a psychological standpoint, validation helps regulate the nervous system. When someone tells you they understand why you feel a certain way, your body naturally relaxes and safety grows. But when validation is consistently missing, the empath learns to validate themselves instead. They start meeting their own emotional needs internally. They write in a journal instead of confiding in someone who won't listen. They reflect instead of asking for reassurance. They process their pain alone rather than risk being dismissed all over again. And here's the key shift that happens once someone learns to consistently validate themselves. Needing outside validation loses its urgency. The empath no longer emotionally depends on you to understand them. This changes everything because persuasion, charm, and even apologies rely heavily on emotional access. But once an empath no longer needs you to confirm their worth or make sense of their experience, that access shrinks dramatically. They become fully grounded in their own perspective. They trust their emotional intelligence once again. And once that trust is rebuilt inside themselves, they stop looking for it from outside. When an empath grows quiet, it often means they've stopped seeking from you something they've finally learned to give themselves. And that kind of hard-earned independence rarely reverses. When an empath goes quiet, a lot of people wrongly assume it's meant as punishment. They read the silence as manipulation, passive aggression, or a deliberate attempt to trigger guilt. But most of the time, that quiet has nothing to do with control. It's entirely about peace. Empaths are certainly familiar with emotional turmoil. They've spent months, sometimes even years, working through tension, overanalyzing conversations, holding on to unspoken disappointment, and trying to manage both their own emotions and someone else's. That constant emotional watchfulness is exhausting beyond words. It keeps the nervous system nearly always on high alert. For them, silence is genuine relief. It's the first real breath after carrying heavy emotional weight for far too long. When they stop arguing, it isn't because they've run out of things to say. It's because they no longer want to keep fighting just to be understood. When they stop reacting, that's not indifference. It's simply the absence of emotional chaos. Their body no longer braces for impact. Their mind no longer rehearses endless explanations. At first, peace feels strange, almost hollow, but then it becomes deeply grounding. From a psychological view, humans are naturally drawn toward what feels safe. When a relationship keeps triggering anxiety, defensiveness, or disappointment, the brain starts linking that connection to constant stress. Even when love is real, ongoing stress wears away at emotional security completely. At some point, the empath realizes that staying emotionally engaged costs them far more than quietly stepping back ever would. This realization isn't dramatic. It's steady and complete. They start noticing how calm they feel once they stop trying to fix what's broken. They notice how much mental space clears up once they stop analyzing someone else's behavior. They feel their own energy return once they stop overextending their empathy. That calm becomes something they crave, not because they stopped caring about the other person, but because they finally started caring about themselves. So silence, in the end, is never revenge. It's restoration. It's choosing to calm the nervous system instead of living inside ongoing emotional chaos. It's choosing self-respect over compromising again and again. It's choosing to feel aligned inside rather than chasing approval from outside. And here's what makes this last stage so lasting. Once peace takes the place of anxious attachment, the empath almost never chooses to step back into turmoil. Nobody can compete with someone's inner steadiness. When an empath falls quiet and stays calm, it's a sign that everything has already come to a close. They're not trying to change you anymore. They're not trying to change themselves just to make you comfortable. They're simply moving toward a space, both inside and out, that actually feels sustainable for them emotionally. Their silence was never meant to wound anyone. It was meant to heal. And once real healing starts, the chapter that caused the pain has already come to an end.